The night was cold, the kind of cold that freezes breath before it leaves your lips. Snowflakes fell silently over the Norwegian fortress of Fredrikstad, where the faint glow of torches flickered against the walls. Inside the trenches below, soldiers of the Swedish army crouched low, their rifles pressed to their chests, their eyes fixed on the dark shape of the fortress ahead. And somewhere among them, walking calmly under that deadly sky, was their king, Charles XII of Sweden, the warrior monarch the world called Carolus Rex. Charles XII was not born to be ordinary. When he ascended the throne at 16, Sweden was one of the strongest powers in Europe. He was brilliant, fearless, and almost unnaturally obsessed with war. To him, peace was weakness. The battlefield was his home. He fought Russia, Poland, Denmark, and Norway, always at the front line, always leading his men himself. He never married, never indulged in the pleasures of courtly life. He slept in tents, ate with his soldiers, and believed God had chosen him to fight. For nearly 2 decades, Europe trembled at his name, but his empire, stretched and exhausted, was bleeding. The Great Northern War had devoured thousands of lives. His enemies closed in. His people grew weary, yet Charles refused to stop. In the winter of 1718, he marched once again, this time into Norway, determined to capture the fortress of Fredrikstad, a victory he believed could turn his luck once more. The fortress loomed above the frozen earth, surrounded by cliffs and trenches. Charles's army worked night and day, digging, building, advancing inch by inch toward the enemy walls. Each day, cannon fire echoed across the valley. Each night, the Norwegian defenders launched flares and firebombs to expose the advancing Swedes. It was a slow, grinding war of mud, ice, and death. And yet, amidst this chaos, Charles was everywhere, inspecting trenches, measuring distances, speaking to soldiers. His courage was unmatched, but his recklessness terrified his generals. "Your Majesty," one officer is said to have warned, "the enemy's bullets know no crown." Charles only smiled. "Then let them find me if they can." It was a moonless night. The king had come forward to inspect the new line of trenches close to the fortress. He wore his blue uniform, his long boots, and a simple black felt hat. He climbed to the edge of the trench, resting his arms on the earthwork to observe the enemy lines. Around him, soldiers whispered nervously. They knew how dangerous this position was. Suddenly, the darkness ahead lit up as a flare rose from the fortress wall. For a split second, everything was visible: the king's silhouette, the men crouching beside him, the fortress ramparts in the distance. Then, a single sharp crack, the sound of a bullet slicing through the cold air. The king's body jerked. He did not cry out. His arms slipped from the trench wall and he fell backward into the snow, a neat hole in the left side of his skull, an exit wound on the right. He was dead before his body hit the ground. The king, who had survived 2 decades of war, was killed instantly by one bullet. His soldiers stood frozen in disbelief. For a moment, there was silence, then panic, confusion, grief. The King of Sweden, the unstoppable warrior, had fallen without a sound. They carried his body away under the cover of darkness. News spread like fire: the Lion of the North is dead. But in whispers, another question grew: who had fired the shot? The fortress defenders rejoiced, believing they had killed the enemy king, but some of Charles's officers looked uneasy. The wound seemed strange. The bullet had entered from the left side of his head and exited through the right, but Charles had been facing the enemy. If the shot came from the fortress, it should have struck his front, not the side. Something didn't fit. The simplest explanation was that the king had been shot by an enemy musket or cannon from the fortress walls. It made sense. He was standing exposed, inspecting the lines. A lucky shot from a Norwegian defender could easily have struck him. For 2 centuries, this was the official story. The martyr king, killed by an enemy bullet during battle. His people buried him with honor in Stockholm's Riddarholm church, draped in royal colors. But rumors persisted. Soldiers whispered about the direction of the wound, about strange orders that night, about certain officers who had been too quiet afterward. Something about the death of King Charles didn't feel like a simple act of war. Decades later, new whispers emerged. Perhaps it was not the enemy at all. Perhaps the bullet came from within his own lines. In the chaos of the siege, with soldiers working, digging, and firing in the dark, it was possible someone accidentally shot toward the king's position. A tragic mistake, friendly fire. But then another problem appeared. If a Swedish soldier had fired, the bullet would have come from the right side, not the left. The trajectory didn't fit. Still, the mystery remained unresolved. No witnesses had seen the fatal shot. The king's guards, close enough to be his shield, claimed they saw nothing. The most chilling theory came later, that King Charles was assassinated by one of his own men. Historians began piecing together fragments. The army was exhausted, the people at home furious, and many of his officers secretly wanted peace. Charles had become increasingly stubborn and erratic. His war had cost thousands of lives, and the country's treasury was nearly empty. Could someone have decided that the only way to save Sweden was to remove the king? One story tells of a Swedish officer, André Sicker, who, years later while delirious with fever, confessed that he had shot the king to save the realm. He later denied the confession once recovered, but the rumor was unstoppable. In another account, a soldier near the king that night was seen cleaning his weapon nervously after the shot. And then there was the strange object found years later, a flattened button made of brass and lead, said to match the size of the hole in the king's hat. Some claimed it was the bullet that killed him, not a musket ball, but a makeshift projectile fired from close range. Assassination or coincidence? No one could tell. 200 years later, in 1917, Swedish scientists reopened the royal tomb to finally answer the question. What they found only deepened the mystery. The king's body was astonishingly well preserved. The wound was clear, entry on the left, exit on the right. But when they examined the skull and nearby tissues, they found no traces of lead, the common material of musket bullets at the time. So if not lead, what was it? They tested the angle of the shot. The bullet had traveled upward about 15 degrees from below the left side of the head, but the enemy fortress was above the king's position, not below. If the shot came from the fortress, the angle should have been downward, not upward. Every answer created a new question. A century after that, in the 21st century, scientists revisited the mystery using modern ballistics and forensic modeling. Researchers built replica skulls, used 3D scanning of Charles's remains, and fired different types of 18th century bullets at various angles. Their conclusion shocked many. The wound was not caused by a soft lead musket ball, it matched instead a hard iron projectile, likely fired from a fortress gun about 200 meters away. This supported the theory that Charles had indeed been killed by enemy fire. But even then, small inconsistencies persisted. The exact type of weapon, the precise firing position, and the lack of lead traces left the door slightly open for alternative explanations. With their king dead, the Swedish troops abandoned the siege and withdrew from Norway. The Great Northern War soon ended. Sweden's empire crumbled, giving way to an age of parliament and liberty and an end to absolute monarchy. Charles's death marked not only the end of a man, but the end of an era. His stubborn dreams of conquest had died with him, leaving behind a nation weary of blood and war. And yet, in Sweden, the legend of Carolus Rex only grew. To some, he remained a hero, a man who lived and died for honor. To others, he was a symbol of blind ambition and tragic obsession. But to all, he became a mystery, the king killed by a bullet no one could trace. Even today, historians argue over the details. Was it the enemy's lucky shot, a soldier's mistake, or an act of treachery from within? 3 centuries have passed, but no one can say for sure. The evidence, the hat, the wound, the missing bullet, all tell stories that point in different directions. What remains is a haunting image, a proud king standing tall under the burning light of war, a flash in the dark, a single shot, and silence, the kind of silence that lasts forever. In Stockholm's Riddarholm Church, the tomb of King Charles XII still rests under a simple black stone. Visitors who stand before it often whisper the same question: who fired the shot that killed the king? No answer echoes back, only the cold hush of history and the quiet certainty that some secrets are meant to stay buried.